Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
My name's Tom Kowalski, and I'll be your host for today. Joining me are recurring hosts Jason Brown and Travis Walker. How are y'all doing today?
Good. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, doing well, Tom. Glad to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, I hope you're excited to talk about CloudFlare and the latest and what they're working on. So how familiar are you all with CloudFlare? You used it? What's your familiarity?
Yeah, so it's funny. Up until very recently, I've only really known CloudFlare as like a CDN solution. So just hearing that they've expanded on some of their services into potentially becoming a fully fledged cloud platform is really exciting to hear about.
Yeah, similarly for me, I haven't worked with it too much. It's definitely been something that I've read about, and I've known about CloudFlare's workers for a while, but I've never really gotten the opportunity to experiment with them.
Yeah, that's it's kind of how I was up to a couple months ago when they started really releasing a lot of competitive offerings, a lot of filling in the gaps to what the other cloud providers offer. So yeah, let's jump into a little bit of history and CloudFlare for those that don't know, and how they kind of started and up to kind of where they are now. So they started in 2009, and their basic offering was the CDN, like you mentioned, Jason. So that's how most companies have leveraged them, and with that they offered more on top of that, like the DDoS protection, DNS services, web application firewalls, and everything that they could do kind of at the edge that made things more performant, more security focused, where a lot of companies were running their platforms either in other cloud providers or co-locations or on-prem. This allowed them to have that global presence without having to migrate their workloads to another cloud provider or somewhere else. So yeah, that's kind of how they started, and now they are one of the biggest in CDN. So more than the other cloud providers, they have more edge locations in more countries, more cities all around the world. They have really good relationships, partnerships, integrations with ISPs directly. So yeah, that's a little bit how they started. Have you guys ever used them, right, in your companies or previously for those types of services like that? CDN?
God, once is a very long time ago. So not in my current job, but in a previous job. So yeah, like I mentioned, as a CDN. But yeah, not a whole lot of experience with it outside of that.
Yep, never used it.
Okay. So they started to offer more services around that, some more one-off things, if you will. And one of the bigger ones was the way that they do tunneling. If you guys haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. If you're doing local development, just being able to create a tunnel, right? Instead of, having your own static IP address is nice if you're, working, doing development locally, and being able to share that out while you're working on, or, run your own NAS device. But they make it a lot easier to give you like a public IP address and that tunneling to a local location. If for personal use, it's practically free. So I highly recommend looking into that. But some of the other services that they offered around that for helping other companies is, you know, like the rate limiting, right, with the DDoS protection, the bot management. They're one of the biggest outside of Google. And then just like the load balancing, routing, things like that. And then DNS. They're the one of the biggest providers of DNS, right, outside of Google. They have the IP address of 1111. Just kind of iconic there. So yeah, that's a little bit, you know, an overview of what they, you know, kind of started off with, and, you know, what they provide outside of their latest offerings that are more developer cloud platform focused. But yeah, so we're here to talk about their latest in that developer platform offerings. So they started off in 2017 with what they call CloudFlare Workers. And you can kind of think of it as the like Lambda at Edge, right? Where it was just JavaScript, but it allows you to do it allows you to do compute, right, at the edge locations. And those are quickly followed up by the other services that get the names of them here. The ones that came out right after those were the R2, which was it's kind of like the S3 equivalent. They had KV, which is kind of like stands for key value, which is kind of like the Dynamo equivalent. And those were, and then Pages, which is kind of making it easier to deploy like those static assets. So kind of like the in between S3 and CloudFront, where, you know, you would use it for more of like your like Jamstack, like static hosting of assets that are right on the edge there. And, you know, they made it really easy to deploy those offerings. Have you guys used anything else outside of AWS that's kind of like that? Have you used like Vercel or like a Netlify, and those offerings?
Are you talking like third-party style?
Yeah.
Yeah, not too much. Like, you know, I've got some experience with AWS and Azure and GCP, but, you know, I tend to stick to the, you know, the platform-specific stuff where I can. Although, you know, there is definitely an advantage in choosing the right tool for the job. And some of these third-party offerings, they're very hyper-focused on doing as good a job as they can in their domain. So, yeah, it's interesting to see how Cloudflare is sort of expanding the domain.
How about you, Travis? Have you used like Netlify?
I have not. No, I like Jason. I've kind of stuck with the kind of major cloud providers and haven't ventured far out of that.
Yeah. So I have used them, and like the biggest difference, and I would kind of put them in the middle between like an AWS and like a Netlify. You still have a lot of, it's like open to what you want to run on there, but it is very opinionated on how things are connected. Does that make sense? Like with like a Netlify, it's like, you know, you're just going to deploy like these set kind of solutions where, like Cloudflare allows you to, it's in between AWS where you have a lot more flexibility in what you can do. It's still very opinionated, right? They kind of have to. You can only do JavaScript or, I guess, WebAssembly kind of opens it up to other things. But that's kind of like, you know, where I see it sitting. And it makes the developer experience a lot nicer too. So compared to like AWS, there's some things like they try with like Amplify to kind of make it a more, you know, simpler experience with just the things that you need to deploy a website. But there's still just so much going on, and a lot of things are disconnected, right? You run an application and it goes to, you know, just the analytics, right? It goes to CloudWatch and you have to set that up. And then you got to set up roles to connect to this and that and the permissions. And it's it's a lot more simplified experience where, you're just these different offerings like the, I guess I kind of didn't go into the newer ones. Those were kind of the ones that I said before that were the ones that they released kind of around in 2017. But these newer offerings, they kind of fill in the gaps a lot more. So since then, they've released Cloudflare email routing, right? It's like a comparative to SES. The a database offering they're calling D1. It's serverless. So that's the other thing too. As I jump into these, the thing that I like about it the most is that they're all serverless, well, relatively serverless billing models. I say that with like a grain of salt. Some things it's, you got to start with $10 a month, right? If you sign up for, various services, but that $10 kind of gets applied to your account. They do have a free tier offering for a lot of these, but for the most part, there's no management, right? There's no, where AWS kind of started to blur the lines of like the scale from zero. They kind of got rid of that in their serverless definition. And now it's kind of just like, managed auto scaling. And, they still call it serverless where you're still paying for things running. So there's none of that I'm aware of in their offerings. I haven't come across it. But there's some kind of, there's some of the upfront, you got to pay, X to start using the serverless or the service. But the billing model is just pay for what you use after that. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, we're starting to touch on the part that's like of particular interest to me, which is how Cloudflare, how their model, how they implemented the model for achieving high availability, right? So you have like the other cloud platforms, the big ones like AWS, Azure, GCP. The way they have organized it, they've got regions, which are collections of availability zones, right? And each availability zone, you basically represents a physical data center, right? And so you have VMs that you can create that sort of float between data centers, right? And so when you're creating these resources, you're selecting a number of AZs within a region to achieve that high availability. So how is this, from what I understand, this is completely different in Cloudflare. So how does that work?
Yeah, that's glad you asked that. So everything is on the edge. So it's comparable to AWS. Think of it as you're just working in CloudFront, and all of these services are somehow just, are integrated in CloudFront. It's all the edge. And, that might be kind of scary, right? And you're thinking, oh, database is here or there, but it's ultimately what you would want to do, right? So, some people start off at a region, and then it's like, okay, we need to have a CDN, and then it starts to get complicated of figuring out, I have this data in this region, and these workers running there, and what's the latency. They started from there, right? You start right at the edge in your compute. So those workers, they can either run right where the user is, like as close as possible, but then they also offer it, they'll call it like smart adding, smart placement. If your data is at a certain location, it'll run that worker closer to that location, depending on if you have multiple round trips, right? If you're hitting the database multiple times, but if you hit it just once, it may say like, okay, like it will automatically figure out the latency, like from where they are to how many trips there are to the database or whatever other service you're calling, and figure out where's the best spot to run that. So the overall latency of the request is minimal.
Interesting.
So they kind of, whereas, if you're working with AWS, you kind of have to do that yourself. So that's what I really like about this. They start with that serverless and edge approach right out of the gate.
So how does it, with with pricing, I'm assuming so they still charge you per invocation. How with that capability of kind of this high availability global, infrastructure, is it more expensive than like AWS because now they're going to have more instances of they're going to have more instances of the worker in various edge locations?
It can be, but what's nice is they kind of give you that. It's like a slider, right? Of, hey, run this faster versus cheaper, right, for their services. So you can decrease that redundancy or replication of the data to the different services, and they keep getting better at that. Especially with a lot of their recent offerings, where they're like smart placement and things like that. Whereas kind of before it was like, okay, you had to pick and choose, like, how are my users gonna, where are my users mostly gonna be? Where should I store this? Whereas now, and kind of the direction they're taking is, what do you want it to do? Do you want this service or these calls to be faster or cheaper, right? And it's kind of nice to not even have to think about it, right? I'll allow you to put the data where these users are accessing it the most, and that's where it's going to be stored. And maybe, it's replicated somewhere else, but not more places than it needs to be. So yeah, it's pretty cool how they do that. The pricing follows that. It's like all of that serverless model, right? Of, okay, how much is it how much is it replicating to? And then, how many of the calls that are being made as well.
And with that, and I hope this doesn't go too much into like later in your talk, but with like managing cold starts with more potential locations, like, does it talk about balancing that with like how you configure that pricing option too? Like,
that is interesting. I don't really. I know that the cold start is not as big as it is with like a traditional Lambda function, since the workers are more like Lambda at edge, right? Where it's that you're limited, right? You don't have that access to like a VPC, right, where it's spinning up, or access to a lot of like the back end like OS things. So it's that more isolated, right? You're just kind of running code. You can bring your libraries, your JSON libraries with you, or WASM or WebAssembly binaries with you. So the cold start isn't that big of an issue, right? Because this started off as this is how your routing is done, right? This is the Cloudflare workers were basically your dynamic routing, and you could do like a little bit of logic. So they kind of branded it now as, oh, this is more like a compute layer where you can do a little bit more. You can actually run your app on it. So they have that idea of the cold start is kind of minimized or negligible in that. So does that kind of answer what you're?
Yes, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, I just want to make a comment. Like, when looking at compute specifically, dividing things up between, let's just look at AWS in particular. So you have something like EC2, which is, basically like a one-to-one between, a virtual machine to like something you'd have on-prem. ECS, which you've got containerized compute workloads, and then you have Lambda, which is just moving up the stack that way, completely serverless. And so when you move up the stack like that, you get less control, but way more ease of use and way less of stuff that you have to manage. It seems like Cloudflare is like moving up the stack with the management of their entire platform in that way, which is really interesting to me as well. It seems like it might be especially appealing to people who are looking to go into cloud native greenfield development. Like I've seen a lot of clients that they've got a lot of stuff that is legacy or aging, and they want to move it to the cloud, like lift and shift, and then over time sort of just refactor and take advantage of the things the cloud has to offer. But for somebody going into cloud native greenfield development, like starting from scratch, I mean, this seems like it could be way quicker to get up to speed. Anyway, just an observation.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? Where AWS, they focus on that, hey, move your workload over, and then they have to have so many features to kind of slowly, work your, modernize your workload to be more serverless cloud native. Whereas, with Cloudflare, it's pretty much greenfield, right? You have to build on this platform and the way that it is. But it's just so much simplified, right? Because they don't have to have all those little offerings, right? Like to connect to a VPC and everything that goes along with that. So yeah, this is why I love serverless. We've talked about this, and for all those reasons, and it's just really nice developer experience because it's just all serverless. It just connects like the IAM roles, like I mentioned. Like the idea with theirs is you kind of just bind this data store to these workers, right? And now they have access, and that's it, right? You're done. There's no like, oh, I have to deploy this and change that, and yeah, it's really nice.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like there would still be the need for some kind of infrastructure as code, especially if you like expand into using a lot of the new features that Cloudflare has to offer. Like if you want to have a repeatable environment, like, prod, staging, dev, etc. Do you know if there's any infrastructure as code options? Like, oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a great, yeah. So they don't really have their own, but they integrate, they partner with all of the third-party infrastructure as code. So like serverless framework, Pulumi, SST. So all of those like third-party like infrastructure as code options, they integrate with them, right out of the box gate, or they partner really closely with them, right? Where AWS kind of has their own, and they'll work with the other ones, maybe give them let them know what new cloud formation things are coming out early and things like that. Whereas, they're not really in the game of it, and they're like, hey, these providers, these deployment CI/CD services, they work great, and we're just going to integrate with them right out of the gate. So yeah, that's if you're familiar with like Pulumi or serverless framework, SST. Those are the ones I've used, but yeah, I'm sure there's other ones as well.
Yeah. Taking a quick look, it seems like there is a Terraform provider for a Cloudflare Terraform provider. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, and then more on that. So more on the services. They've just released a lot. So they had their developer conference, or I forget what they call it, Dev Week, Developer Week, or whatever, is back in April. And this is what just really got my attention of all the things that they were releasing, of just making it easier for the development experience. So they kind of already had queues, and that was kind of out there, kind of like an SQS thing. But one of the latest things, and it's really not out yet, is like their pipelines and what they're calling like durable execution and workloads. They're still like in beta, but it's a really nice experience of what I've seen people using it, and I haven't got to use it myself yet, but it's like, I don't know if you've used step functions, but I wasn't really a fan of it just by the way that it's, I don't know, just like the way that they do it. It's like like another language that you have to know, and like the testing and everything is I don't know, difficult. Whereas like with Cloudflare, it's kind of just like built right in to the flow of your application, right? They provide you with like a library, and interacting with it is right in your JavaScript code. Like, call this, wait for that, do this, and it's just lines in JavaScript versus that, more the static, what do they call it, language that they use for building the workflows in step functions. So I don't know if you guys had that experience, how much you've used step functions, but
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Travis.
I was going to say just a little bit. It kind of brought up a question. So the way I understand it, you essentially have to have like a worker that essentially just runs as your orchestrator, and then you have. Is that how that works?
Well, that's how it is now. But they're coming out with what they're going to call workflows and pipelines.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, to make it just a little bit easier for that coordination of like long running things like the event driven, where the workers right now are more of that. Not asynchronous. That's the word. More synchronous, right? It runs and then stops, right? Where the coordination is a little harder, and then they have queues to kind of help with that. But yeah, the new thing that they're doing is the workflows and pipelines that just make it very easy for all the events in Cloudflare. So it's kind of like Event Bridge in AWS, but everything from rows in their database changing. You can have events go off of that, and it's just very easy to do, to integrate. Whereas with AWS, they support so much, it's very disconnected, right? If you use some of their services, that you can get some things, and just setting it up is difficult. But so with Cloudflare, their database offering, you can use others, and they're very good at integrating with it. But their native database offering, their D1, it is compatible with like the SQLite interface, which is really all you need, in my opinion, if all of the infrastructure behind the scenes is taken care of for you, right? When you use like, MySQL or SQL Server, the benefits of those are the auto scaling and just the management, right, behind the scenes. But when you're using like a cloud native serverless database, and all of the scaling, partitioning, all of that is done behind the scenes, you really just need SQLite syntax when working with it. But yeah, and then once you do that, if you do simplify it, like this is how it's done, the integrations with things become so much easier, right? To leverage the other services, right, and do events of things changing and things like that. Does that make you guys have questions? Sense?
Yeah, I mean that's really neat. I mean, it's simpler, but it kind of brings up questions around, because you're eliminating things like VPCs, and so kind of your access, the way you set up your permissions, like seems like that. Like, can you explain a little bit more how that works in Cloudflare and
so that's
secure your environment?
That's what I really like about it. There's no concept of like private VPCs, where I feel like that's legacy security, right? It's it's not, where now things, it's the zero trust model, where before it was inside the network, right? Everything's okay. It doesn't have to be that locked down. Where now, right, going forward, it's that zero trust. Every service, endpoint, database, it could be exposed to the internet, right? And it's not an issue because it, by default, has that authentication and authorization mechanisms. So to put it in like kind of AWS terms, how they have kind of like their data API? It's kind of like that, but it's built in, right? There's like, you have to use that. There is no, way to connect to it. Like, you're inside the network, right? From like an IP address. It's all public, right? And not necessarily public. You still have like the bindings of how, it connects to it. And, you can connect to it publicly by, whitelisting IP addresses or whatever you want to do, like your office or whatever. But yeah, I kind of got rambly there, but does it make sense? It's all public, but it forces you to authenticate, right?
Yeah.
You're not.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, I like that. It's very fascinating. It makes me think of a whole nother topic, which is how are people's attitudes going to change over time around like compliance and stuff? Because I feel like this would be very very hard for a lot of people to accept, and I think it just brings up a really interesting topic.
No, I completely agree with you. And with the compliance stuff, it from what I know, right, that I'm not, don't take this, I'm not a lawyer, right, but when you secure on the edge like that, it's no one that I know of, right, is violating any like laws, right? A lot of the compliance stuff comes because it's old school, right? The auditors. This is what we say. This is what we recommend, right? It has to be inside a private network. So then a lot of the companies are like, okay, this is how we do it. But if you actually secure your stuff with like, zero trust and it is open to the internet, it still meets all the compliances, the due diligence that you're doing by securing stuff that I've seen. Maybe there's cases then it's not, but for, I'm in this world, and usually when they say, oh, we have to do this, you don't have to. There's no laws that say that you have to. It's just your auditor is saying that, right? To be, for them to certify you. So if that's the case, I suggest you get a different auditor, or, compliance certificate issuer, right, that understands modern infrastructure and security. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't take that as legal advice.
It's interesting because, it seems like, there's like this in AWS, there's the shared responsibility model. Well, there are things that you're responsible for when you create these resources and configure them, and there's a certain amount that AWS is responsible for. And it seems like this, for Cloudflare, it sort of shifts the onus more onto Cloudflare to prove their compliance with the way that they handle authentication and security, because a lot of the management is being pushed off to Cloudflare rather than what you're being responsible for in creating and assembling the resources. Yeah, I definitely think that's warrants another discussion, but yeah, I think that definitely would definitely push the responsibility more into Cloudflare's lap when it comes to audits, security, compliance, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's that it's more opinionated, right? Like you kind of have to do it this way versus like, AWS where, they have to allow like the legacy stuff of, our clients, maybe can't use authentication of the database. So they have to be, inside this private VPC and, they talk back and forth unencrypted, right? Where this is, kind of forcing you, yes, that all of it, all connections have to be encrypted and right, from the get-go. So that's why it's great for greenfield, right? And they kind of push those, like the best of the best practices on you, and you kind of have to do it in order to build on top of it.
Yeah, it seems like there's so much that's just baked in. Like we talked about the hybrid geo-based / latency-based routing. It seems like there's a lot that they just kind of enforce best practices to a higher degree and leave less room for like error for whoever's configuring the resources, right? There's a lot that's good about that, I think.
Yeah, it's very opinionated, right? So if you like this style, right, and what you have to do it to programming, like the WebAssembly or in JavaScript, and you don't have that flexibility, the SSH into things, right? If you like the serverless mindset, like this is, it's really nice because it's just very streamlined for all serverless and edge, right? And where it's still AWS makes it easy to run things like globally, multi-region, and they keep making it easier, but there's just so many options, and it takes like a team to manage that infrastructure of how things are replicating, and how the CloudFront is talking to this, and whereas this it's just out of the gate, right? It's assuming you want the best infrastructure globally, and here you go. You don't have to worry about configuring legacy resources and such. But yeah, just a little bit more. We're getting late on time, but yeah, I just want to throw out there. But this latest developer conference, they released like a bunch of other stuff too, like their analytics engine, just making it really easy to do the real-time analytics, so you don't have to use third-party services or kind of wire up your own way of doing analytics and with CloudWatch or things like that. They're streaming for images and video, just making it really easy to do the compression. I don't know if you guys have done like the AWS Elemental stuff, but it's a lot, right? You kind of have to allow this. It just makes it so easy. Wire this up, allow this to be done in different, compressions, formats, right? And it's just automatically served up, right? Versus like S3, you have some images in there, and you have to, maybe CloudFront is doing different compressions to send it out. This is just, turn the service on, right? It's whatever format is, already pushed out there in the correct compression that you asked for. Just making it really easy. And then I don't know if you guys have done much with the Kinesis video streams. Like I was really intrigued with that, but it makes it really hard to do. And they just released Cloudflare Cloudflare Coles, I think it's called. And it's just a lot easier, like the API and working with it to do those, like what are they called? Like turn tunnels and stun tunnels, where you can do that peer-to-peer networking, right? Like a video conferencing calls, things like that, putting it right in your app. So, yeah, just really excited. And it's all serverless pricing. It's all pay per use. They do make you pay like upfront for some things, which is a little annoying, but a lot less annoying than AWS is now. Serverless just means managed auto scaling, where it doesn't scale to zero. So yeah, that's a bit about it. Yeah, I'd like to dive into it more, but I think that's enough for this intro for today. You guys have any questions? Any more you want to talk about?
I mean, this sounds great. Yeah, I hadn't known that Cloudflare was really expanding and becoming a cloud provider itself. So it's great to hear that they've expanded a lot of their features and solutions to really contend with some of the big ones. So I'm definitely excited to try it out.
Yeah, me too. I've only done like the small projects or whatever, like little one-off things, but I'm excited to use it for real. And I do hear, little bits of gripes on Twitter if, things the developer experience just isn't there yet, but they look like they're actively working on it, right? Anybody that has an issue, they're like, okay, how can we make this better, right? Interacting with them on Twitter or X now and just, delivering those changes really fast. Whereas I kind of feel like AWS is kind of let off like their serverless offerings and developer experience. Like they're completely focused on the AI, which is great. But there is so much more room for the better experience and offerings around serverless. So I was kind of bummed about that, but I'm glad, right, Cloudflare is stepping in, and yeah.
I completely agree with you, Tom. It does feel that way. It feels like innovation in the serverless and edge computing space seems to have stalled a little bit. So it's really, really encouraging to hear Cloudflare's kind of carrying the torch.
Yeah. I'm excited. So yeah, we'll give it a while, and maybe we'll get some people on that are using it, and hopefully you all get to use it for real projects and that are in production, right? Real customers, and yeah, let's see how it goes. So yeah, anything else?
No further questions for me, but yeah, just looking forward to trying it out.
All right. Yeah, me too. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today in this episode. I'm not sure when the next one is and what we're talking about, but yeah, stick around the Discord or check out the Discord, and we'll have updates in there on what the next episodes. You can come join us in the chat, ask questions. But yeah, until next time, thank you. Thank you to the guests.
Yep. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Yep.